Hi there, and welcome to Power Play. I'm Vashi Kapelos in Ottawa on this Tuesday. Tonight, Doug Ford doubles down.
They know what I was doing, and I said I was going to stop it on Monday. It was very successful.
Ontario's Premier stands by his tough on America stance as the feds say they stand ready to restart talks with Trump. How are the strategies playing out in D.C.? Former Quebec Premier and Team Canada delegate Jean Charest is in the U.S. Capitol and will join us in moments. Then, Alberta's government forces a contract on teachers.
This is not a step any government takes lightly.
This government has done more than silence teachers and school leaders. It has silenced democracy itself.
The most cowardly act I have ever seen from any government.
Alberta uses the notwithstanding clause to impose a full contract on striking teachers, forcing them back to classes tomorrow, with unions across that province promising what they call an unprecedented response. The province's education minister will be here live coming up. Plus, the countdown is on 1 week to the federal budget.
Canadians are hungry for an affordable budget.
It's clear that the member opposite is driving for a Christmas election. Canadians are counting on us to pass this budget.
Central banker turned Prime Minister Mark Carney has just 1 week left to finalize his first fiscal blueprint, with the U.S. trade war looming large over the country's economic outlook. The Fed seem to be trying to set a narrative focused on bolstering domestic industry and workers with pre-budget announcements. Is it breaking through? We'll dig into that question with our front bench. Dan Moulton, Shakir Chambers, Kathleen Monk, and Laura Stone will all be here a little bit later on in the show. First, though.
Did the Prime Minister or anyone on his staff see the ad before it went out?
Our government is committed to doing the serious work necessary to get a deal with the United States.
Did the Prime Minister or his staff see the ad before it went out? Yes or no?
I can imagine the frustration that the Leader of the Opposition feels when he sees a Prime Minister elected to take this serious economic and sovereignty challenge.
He has a duty to say whether or not he saw the ad that he says blew up the so-called deal he had.
Just because the Leader of the Opposition keeps asserting the same fake premise doesn't make it real.
The feds grilled on the Hill 6 days after Donald Trump shut down trade talks, scrapping any immediate hopes at relief for steel, aluminum, and energy industries that Prime Minister Mark Carney has said were close to completion. Trump blamed an Ontario ad campaign that used footage of former U.S. President Ronald Reagan arguing against protectionism, and Carney said to take Trump at his word on that. But Premier Doug Ford claims the Prime Minister saw the ad before it had a chance to anger the president. We have yet to receive official comment from the Prime Minister or his office on that. A government source won't say if the Prime Minister saw the ad, but told CTV in part, quote, "This decision was made by the government of Ontario, and the federal government was not involved in the production or distribution of this ad." Ford has since pulled the ads off U.S. airwaves, but stands by his strategy.
Well, they know what I was doing, and I said I was going to stop it on Monday. It was very successful. The negotiations been going on month after month after month. We need to sit down and start focusing on it, in my opinion. I'd take a no deal instead of a bad deal.
Have you talked to the Prime Minister since yesterday?
I think he text messaged me a few things, but outside of that,
was he happy with you? Or?
Yeah, he's happy. Why wouldn't he be happy? We're his closest friend and ally, just like the U.S.
So will negotiations start again? Is Team Trump at all willing to get back to the table? Former Quebec Premier Jean Charest is currently leading a Chamber of Commerce trade mission to Washington, D.C. Hi, Mr. Charest. Great to see you and good to welcome you back to our program.
Thank you, Vashi.
I know that you're in D.C. at a particularly, I guess, interesting time, I could call it, in the relationship between our two countries. What is being conveyed to you about the position we find ourselves in at this moment, if you could share?
Well, I'm here with the Canadian Chamber of Commerce and with the chair, Candace Lang. It's a delegation of business people that had been planned for a while. So, and I just finished a panel here at the Brookings Institute after briefings this morning at the embassy. You know what is happening is what you're all picking up in the media. This is an environment in which there's a lot of volatility. President Trump decided to bring an end to negotiations that were happening around steel and aluminum and energy. But you know, the message for everyone here is keep your cool. And the number one objective of Canada is the renewal of this trade agreement we have with the United States and Mexico. And that is going to take a while. It'll start in earnest in 2026. And it means if we're able to protect it, that, you know, 90% of all the merchandise going back and forth between Canada will be free of tariffs. And the bigger issue is the special tariffs that we have on softwood lumber, aluminum, steel, autos. That's where the real problems are, Vashi.
How worried are you that we will not be able to protect what CUSMA affords us at this moment?
I'm optimistic. I think we will, and the reason for that is that, contrary to the relationship that the United States has with Europe, South Korea, or Japan, what is different for us is that our supply chains are so intertwined. I mean, they're very, very intertwined. And that is true for Mexico, United States, and Canada and the United States. That's the big difference. And to undo that would have pretty grave economic consequences. And add to that the fact that Mexico and Canada together are the most important trading partners of the United States in that order. We in Canada are the biggest buyers of American products and services. And so I'm optimistic just because the economic consequences of undoing this trade relationship would be very, very important for Americans, and I don't think they want to go there.
There were a lot of businesses in NAFTA negotiations, or renegotiations, I should say, round one. A lot of business stakeholders, a lot of congressional representatives who agreed with the facts as you laid them out and advocated for them directly to the White House. There doesn't seem to be as many of them, or anywhere close to as many of them this time around. Do you think the president can be convinced of the kinds of potential consequences that you very factually present?
American voices, a lot of them in the business community and in Congress, have been silenced. And they're intimidated by the approach of the Trump administration. And you're quite right. I mean, they are not speaking up in the way that we had come to know them when we were dealing with the issues between both our countries. Now, that will change. It is changing. We're hearing more and more people in the business community speak up as inflation settles in, as costs go up, as the consequences are more and more evident of having more tariffs. And the midterms are coming around in a year from now. And so I think you'll hear more of those voices. And it's a key question, Vashi, because the most effective influence on President Trump are Americans, not Canadians. And so we do need our allies to speak up, and that is a cause of concern for us.
As we strive to convince those allies to do just that, I'm wondering, because you offer such a unique perspective, you've obviously you've been very, very active on the provincial side of things as well as on the federal side of things. How important do you think it is that we speak with one voice, and what does that entail from where you sit?
The provinces want to work with the federal government, and the federal government wants to work with the provinces. There's no question about that. And I'm not too concerned about that. By the way, I was not offended by the ad that Premier Ford put out there, and no one could anticipate that President Trump reacted the way he did. And I even put it on my own social media for the whole 7 minute of the Ronald Reagan intervention, so people can make up their own mind. But we're also adults. If it's a distraction to the American administration, well, so be it. We want to focus, not let lose sight of the real objective for us, which is securing the future of this trade agreement, and not react every time the American administration or the president says something. We need to be more strategic, Vashi. We need to be smart on how we do things. They are 10 times bigger, but I think that we've been here before. We're smart, we're strategic, and the provinces and the feds overall, I think, are working very well together.
Do you think the possibility exists, though, for additional schisms between the provinces and the federal government only because of the way in which these negotiations are unfolding? And by that I mean, we've kind of been relegated to a sectoral approach, right? Maybe there's something on aluminum, steel, and energy. Beyond that, the rest of it, like autos and forestry, will likely be subsumed by more general renegotiations on CUSMA. If you have people like Ontario's Premier or BC's Premier who are defensive around very certain sectors that are present in their provinces, like, does the possibility exist for more schisms? And are you worried at all about that?
Well, there's two things I want to say about that. Prime Minister Carney has had more federal provincial meetings since his election than we've had in the last 20 years. And the reason for that is that Canada is one of the most decentralized federations in the world. Provinces are responsible for natural resources. If we are going to deal both with the United States, but also transform, change our economy, both levels of government have to work very closely together. The second thing, Vashi, I'd say about that is we should not be offended by the idea that regional interests may differ from one place to the other. That is true for every country in the world, literally in the world. So let's not be too obsessed by that. Premiers will defend their provinces, as they should. They're elected for that reason. But in the end, the overall interest of Canada will prevail. And I'm very confident that we'll be able to arrive at a common approach that will be in everyone's benefit.
The approach that the Prime Minister is taking right now from the position, and we don't know a lot, I mean, you would probably know more than us, but a lot of the details about what's happening behind the scenes. But he has said, in particular, when pushed by either different political parties or different premiers to fight back harder, there's a time to fight and there's a time to talk. How much longer is the position that this is the time just for talking tenable in your view?
Now's the time to talk. Now's the time to stay very cool and to be very focused on what it is that we want. What does Canada want to do? We want to protect a trade agreement that right now allows 90% of all the merchandise between Canada and the United States to go back and forth without a tariff. That's clearly the objective that we're defending. We have major irritants that are sectoral. 50% tariffs on steel, aluminum, 45% on softwood lumber, 25% on autos, and other things that fall under sectoral tariffs. That is the most urgent issue that we have to deal with, the one that we would have liked to have seen results on in the short term, but President Trump has decided that we're not negotiating anymore. So those are the objectives. The rest is a distraction, frankly, and we need to continue to be the adult in the room, stay focused, stay close to each other, share information, and if we do that, we will increase our chances of coming out of this with a pretty good outcome.
But if the approach right now is not yielding results, in particular on the punishing sectoral tariffs that you mentioned, that's the impetus for the question around how tenable the position is. Like, after a while, will there be incentive to fight back, or is there a necessity to, given a lack of results?
Well, Canadians are already reacting. I mean, the fact that we took liquor off the shelves of our liquor stores, American liquor, that we're not traveling to the United States as much as we used to, that we're focused on buying Canadian products because it makes sense. These are all the things that are out there that do have a big impact in the negotiations with the Americans. They notice it. They know it, that this is affecting them. Now, again, we have to just be patient. We have to remain, again, very focused if we do that, and continue to do what we're doing now. Go to the rest of the world to diversify our trade. And finally, Vashi, let's keep in mind, a lot of what Donald Trump is doing, we're going to be thankful for in 20 years from now in this way. He is forcing us to look hard at the way we run our economy, the way we run our federal system, our position in the world. Canada has to have a hard look at itself and change the way we operate our economy. And that's on us. It's not on our neighbor. And for the rest, the Americans will always be our most important trading partner, by the way. Tariff, no tariffs, they will always be. And we need to draw a distinction between President Trump and the American people. We like the American people. We get along well with them. They're friends, neighbors, allies. So let's remain very focused, very cool. And if that's the case, and we offer the things we have energy, we have uranium, we have potash, we have critical minerals, we have things. We want to do business with Americans, and we think we are their best partner. focus on these things, and I'm confident that we'll end up in the right place.
I'll leave it on that note. Mr. Charest, appreciate your insights as always. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vashi. Bye-bye.
All right, lots there for us to unpack with the front bench on the latest impasse between Canada and the United States. Dan Moulton, Shakir Chambers, Kathleen Monk, and Laura Stone will be here a little bit later on. First, though, after a quick commercial break, Alberta passes legislation using the notwithstanding clause to get striking teachers back in classrooms tomorrow. Unions are now promising a big response. The province's education minister will join me live on the other end of the break. Stay right there.
Teachers are being forced back and saddled with the very collective agreement that 90% of them rejected only a month ago. An agreement, they said, loudly and clearly, that does not meet their needs, their students' needs, their classrooms, or for their profession. By invoking the notwithstanding clause, this government has done more than silence teachers and school leaders. It has silenced democracy itself.
They did something we've seen a lot from them. They refused to solve a problem of their own making. Instead, they went straight to the nuclear option in what is the most cowardly act I have ever seen from any government.
Just some reaction there from Alberta's teachers union and opposition after the provincial government passed legislation using the notwithstanding clause to impose a new contract on striking teachers, ending their 3-week strike and forcing them back to classrooms by tomorrow. The notwithstanding clause is the sort of get-out-of-charter-free card that allows provinces to circumvent certain protections under the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So what happens now? Dimitrios Nikolaidis is Alberta's education minister, and he's with us live right now from Edmonton. Minister, a pleasure to see you. Thank you so much for making the time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Minister, why does your government's failure to plan for population growth have to be rectified on the backs of teachers?
Well, I wouldn't characterize it as a government failure to plan for population growth. In 2023, our school divisions were working to close classrooms and close student spaces because our enrollment levels were simply not there. This was a province-wide issue, not simply a government challenge, but something that all of our school divisions were experiencing. We did, however, receive a historic amount of new Canadians flooding into the province that I know has put pressure on many other provinces. I know Premier Eby in British Columbia has recently talked about the significant challenges that his province has faced due to unchecked immigration. And so we are working as hard as we can, though, to build new schools, invest more in our education system to help contend with this incredible surge in population growth that we've seen. And just to put it into context, 2023 was the highest level of population increase that we've ever seen in our province's history. And so we're working as aggressively as we can, and we still have a lot more work to do, but we're tackling the issue head on.
The reason that I characterize it as a failure to plan is because I can think back to a time when your party was still in power under a previous premier, where a campaign was launched, for example, to increase net migration from other provinces. I can think back to January 2024 when Premier Smith, not Premier Kenney, said, let's have an aggressive target to double our population. People are going to want to come here and we have to embrace them. And we want to build this place out. My understanding is there's 91,000 new students in the system over the last 5 to 6 years. Only now is your government promising to build new capacity for them. Why is that the teacher's problem and not yours?
Well, it's not the teacher's problem at all. It is our problem. And we did announce a year ago an $8.6 billion commitment to build and renovate 130 schools. And yes, you're correct. We did have a strategy to encourage individuals from other provinces to move to Alberta and find a better future. This was not an international campaign, but even if it was, the provincial government does not control immigration levels. And as I mentioned a moment ago, other premiers, NDP Premier David Eby in British Columbia has raised significant concerns over federal immigration policies, and we're aligned with them in the thinking that there needs to be more of a sustained and thoughtful approach as to how we deal with immigration. That being said, it is our challenge to address, and we are addressing it head on. We'll be working to build and renovate 130 new schools. We're investing more into our classrooms. We're committed to hiring 3,000 more teachers and 1,500 new EAs, educational assistants, and we'll address those concerns head on.
I have to ask with great respect, who do you think would want to come work for your government? What teacher or EA, after what's unfolded in the last 24 hours, do you think would want to work for an employer that actively works to suppress their rights?
Well, we have one of the strongest education systems in the country. Our students in international PISA rankings continue to rank amongst the very top in Canada in reading, in writing, in math, and science, and the top internationally. We have a very strong education system. In addition, after our teachers receive the 17% increase that has been provided to them as part of the settlement, they will be the highest paid, have the highest take-home pay in Western Canada. So we are not just competitive, but leading the pack in so many regard and so many respects. And I think that's something that's quite enticing to many professionals.
Minister, again, with great respect, I take your point on the level of compensation, but I'm sure you understand from the teachers that you oversee that wasn't all that they cared about. You have essentially introduced, through using the notwithstanding clause, the ability for the government to override a teacher's right to strike. They feel, and they have conveyed this on multiple occasions, disrespected by your government. I ask again, what teacher would want, with great respect, to come work for you?
Well, as I mentioned, I think I provided some detail to that answer a moment ago. That being said, our teachers have been on strike for over 3 weeks, and we're not coming closer together in our positions. The latest proposal from the union leadership moved us $2 billion further apart. We then subsequently invited the Alberta Teachers Association to enhanced third-party mediation to help us resolve our differences, to help us bridge the divide and find a path forward. They outright refused to participate in enhanced mediation. So we don't have any other option here. Our students have been out of school for 3 weeks. There are clear studies that demonstrate that such closures and prolonged outages will negatively impact, it's not a question of if, but will negatively impact students academically, socially, and psychologically. As Minister of Education and Childcare, I cannot allow a circumstance to continue that hurts the well-being of children and our students. And so students must return to the classroom as quickly as possible. That's why our government has implemented this measure. Unfortunately, after 18 months of bargaining, we were moving further away, and a refusal to participate in mediation, we had very limited options left.
And look, I definitely, Minister, I'm a mom. I get what you're saying about kids not being in school and the desire of parents to want to see their kids back in school, the detrimental impact of not being in the classroom. But I will challenge you on the merits of the argument that you had no other choice. I looked on your website that details what is available if the government is in a situation. This is from your government's own website. There are two mechanisms, one that has been used before, one that hasn't, the Disputes Inquiry Board, which would have allowed through a ministerial order, you didn't even need to be in the legislature, a minister to suspend the strike for at least 30 days, introduce a third party. It can be binding and not binding. Then there's the possibility of the Public Emergency Tribunal, which hasn't been used but could have been used again, that would have avoided introducing the notwithstanding clause and forcing a contract on teachers for a number of years. Why did you go to that option when you did have other options available?
Well, we carefully weighed all of the options, and you mentioned Dispute Inquiry Board, but you mentioned as well a 30-day period associated to that. So we could have had students return to class for 30 days and be back out on strike and out of the school again. And so further disruption is not in our students' best interest. It's not in the interest of any child. And so we did look carefully at all of the options and, of course, weighed the pros and cons. And guided by what's best for students, we firmly believed that this was the right approach to ensure students return and remain in class where they belong, where they need to be. It's not just for their academic and social and emotional well-being, but of course, students from disadvantaged backgrounds or students who have other complex needs are not receiving the support that they need. For a student in kindergarten or grade 1 who has a complex need and requires the support of an EA or an occupational therapist, they're being pushed further and further behind. Every day this strike continues. We cannot allow that circumstance to continue. Students must return to their classroom, and I'm very happy that they'll be returning tomorrow.
But Minister, again, with respect, in the course of the last 5 minutes, you went from saying you had no other options to, oh, well, you did have other options, but you just didn't want to pursue them because they weren't in the best interests of students. Are you sure you're doing what's in the best interest more largely of Albertans here? Did you really care most about students, or did you want to just bust this union?
The number one priority is and always will be the best interest of our students. As I've mentioned, there are number of different studies that demonstrate the significant harm that is caused to students by prolonged strikes. We cannot allow that circumstance to continue. And I mentioned that there were those other tools which we evaluated, but they were not viable options for us to consider, given the fact that the union had rejected mediation, given that their last proposal put us $2 billion further apart. We looked at the other options to explore whether they would be something that we could indeed implement it, and ultimately decided that would not be the most appropriate course, and have taken the steps that we have. And there's no question the primary consideration here is getting our students back into the classroom. That is the number one priority and is paramount to everything else.
What's your message to teachers, though, who go into that classroom tomorrow? What about their interests? Feeling dejected, feeling like their rights have been stripped, feeling as though you don't have respect for their profession. Do you think that creates the best environment for students?
I think we have to work together with our teachers to help find ways in which to improve conditions. We've seen a significant population increase, as I've noted, and that's not just come in terms of general student numbers, but also in terms of complexity. We've seen a 34% increase in the number of refugee students in the past 4 years, a significant number more students that speak English as an additional language. So our class sizes are growing, and they're also becoming more complex. And we want to work with our teachers to find solutions to help address these concerns. And my message to teachers is that we want to work with you to address these problems. We greatly value and respect the work that you do. We have to get our kids back in school, though, and we have to work together to find both immediate and long-term solutions to help address the issues that we're facing.
Okay, I'll leave it on that note. Minister, I sincerely appreciate your time this evening. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. All the best.
Alberta's Education Minister live to us from Edmonton. We'll take a quick commercial break. On the other end of that break, we're back to our top story, Canada versus the United States. Donald Trump saying that negotiations have come to a conclusion. The blame game begins. Dan Moulton, Shakir Chambers, Kathleen Monk, and Laura Stone are here next. Stay right there.
Mark Carney approved the ad, and then he claimed, after the ad started running, that the ad was the reason why no deal happened. So it's time for Mark Carney to come clean. The reality is that premiers are stepping up to fill the void left behind by Mark Carney's broken promise. He said he would negotiate a win. He said he would have a deal by July 21st. Still no deal. Still no win, still no elbows, still no jobs.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has settled where he's placing blame for the state of Canada-U.S. relations, and that's on Prime Minister Mark Carney, as you heard there. As a catch-up of sorts, late last week, Donald Trump shut down trade talks, blaming an Ontario anti-tariff ad that used footage of Ronald Reagan arguing against protectionism. Ford pulled the ad as of Monday after it played during weekend World Series games, and has said the Prime Minister and his Chief of Staff were made aware of the ad before it aired in the U.S. Carney's office, for its part, has avoided official comment, and a government source will only tell us that it was Ontario's decision. On the strategy itself, Doug Ford is doubling down.
Well, they know what I was doing, and I said I was going to stop it on Monday. It was very successful. The negotiations been going on month after month after month. We need to sit down and start focusing on it, in my opinion. I'd take a no deal instead of a bad deal.
Have you talked to the Prime Minister since yesterday?
I think he text messaged me a few things, but outside of that...
Was he happy with you? Or?
Yeah, he's happy. Why wouldn't he be happy? We're his closest friend and ally, just like the U.S.
So where does all this leave the Prime Minister about domestically and in Canada-US talks? Let's bring in our front bench. Former senior advisor to the Liberal Ontario governments of Dalton McGuinty and Kathleen Wynne, Dan Moulton, is here. He's now a partner with Crestview Strategy. Shakir Chambers worked in Prime Minister Stephen Harper's office before becoming a policy advisor to the International Trade Minister. Kathleen Monk is former director of communications to the late Jack Layton. She's now the principal owner of Monk & Associates. And rounding us out this evening, Laura Stone is a Queen's Park reporter for the Globe and Mail. Hi, everybody. Happy Tuesday. That voice that we just heard asking those questions to the Premier was, of course, Laura's. So I will start with you, Laura. What do you think is really going on behind the scenes here?
Vashi, I honestly don't know. I wish I could read those text messages because I think what's happening is there have been cracks in the cohesion between the messaging of the federal government and the provinces, and particularly with Premier Doug Ford for quite some time. And we've heard Premier Ford calling for Canada to push back, saying we need to retaliate, saying we shouldn't roll over. And that's been in contrast with what Prime Minister Carney has been doing recently, right? He's kind of been playing nice with President Trump. He's been talking about approaching a deal on certain sectors, such as steel and aluminum. And certainly the Prime Minister and his team were kind of setting up the possibility for that happening this week in Asia. I don't think that's going to happen anymore, although this is clearly a very unpredictable times. Don't quote me. But look, I mean, it looks like the provinces are starting to freelance a bit, quite frankly. And, Premier Ford clearly feels that there's a constituency within his province that wants him to push back. He expressed that he's concerned that autos are being left off the table. And he's also acknowledged that Prime Minister Carney is in a different position than him and that he actually has to deal directly with Donald Trump. And so he's maybe not able to say and do some of the things that Ontario is doing. But the cracks are starting to show, I think, is what's happening. The impatience is growing. And, there's clearly frustration, I would say, amongst certain premiers that we have not been able to nail down a deal to protect some of these key sectors in BC as well. And I think that's starting to worry a lot of people at the provincial level.
It does feel like Laura's assessment, Kathleen, that like the cracks are starting to show is the case in this instance. And I know largely Ford and Kearney have been aligned, but the fact that they're sort of digging into these differing positions, let's just say, just on the face of it, of the ad, and not trying to backtrack, like says something, I think.
Yeah, I wonder if history will tell the story of whether the idea of having a premier act as the attack dog was the right move. That playbook has been rolled out in the past. Certainly, we used that playbook in 2018 and 2019 in the NAFTA renegotiations that ended in Kuzma with a specific labor leader. Unifor labor leader was outside being that attack dog. But that labor leader wasn't a premier of a province. And I think therein lies the rub. And, understanding what your role is in a moment in time. And, remember, Doug Ford just got reelected a majority government just 8 months ago on fighting this fight, but fighting for jobs. And I think to hear him kind of crowing today about his earned media coverage or his media coverage on these ads doesn't sit well with a lot of the folks that are losing their jobs in Ingersoll, Kapuskasing, you name it, around the province of Ontario. And so you see Carney reacting to that, seeing how he can pull things back. He's saying, time to talk, like he said in the last few weeks. He's also saying, it's only us, it's only the feds that get to deal with trade and that negotiation, and we're going to wait Trump out. But there's still so many questions, not just the text like Laura mentioned between Carney and Ford. I want to know who is the person that apologized to President Trump, because President Trump today said that Canada has apologized for airing the ad. Who was that? Was that Minister LeBlanc? Yeah. Was it Ford?
I don't think it was Ford.
No, was it Christian, the Ambassador Hillman? Like who was that? That's the question I want to know. I know certainly most people in question period today were curious about whether Carney had seen the ad and approved the ad in advance, but also who's doing kind of the backpedaling would be good to know too.
It does sort of all, if you take it in sum or in the aggregate, Shakir, lead us to this point where it feels like we're no further ahead than we were 6 months ago. Ultimately, when you do kind of contextualize it around people who are worried about their jobs, the state of the economy, the prospect of arriving at some place with the United States where we can take a sigh of relief, it doesn't feel like it's headed necessarily in that direction. I hope I'm wrong.
No, I would agree with you, and I think part of that is just a lack of transparency and communication. I think there's a lot of folks. I'm not sure how detailed the premiers are getting read into what's going on, but I think there's a lot of folks out there that really don't understand or know what the federal strategy is here. I heard you talking to former Premier Charest, and when Carney got elected, he was talking about negotiating a comprehensive trade and security agreement with the U.S. That's been downgraded to, we'll wait until Kuzma and renegotiate that. And even now, just talking about, something around certain sectors, and we'll see if we can reduce the tariffs there. But we don't understand why things have been downgraded. What are we not willing to trade off with the U.S.? Who's being more aggressive? I think Canadians understand that Donald Trump is a very frustrating person to negotiate with, and they're willing to give the Prime Minister the benefit of the doubt. And he actually might be making all the right choices here. But without anybody knowing what's actually going on, you can't take comfort in a strategy that just relies on, hey, just trust me, I'm going to take care of this. I think that's his biggest problem. If he can give some color around what's actually happening there and what's going on moving forward, why things are breaking off and who won't give on what, I think he can get some relief here and release some of the pressure politically on him on this trade front. Because again, I think most Canadians can look at Donald Trump and view him as a very unreasonable negotiator, but we don't know what's going on in these trade negotiations right now.
Yeah, Dan, is there a way for the Prime Minister to address what Shakir lays out, while at the same time, maintain sensitivity around not wanting to put the entire I understand the impetus to not want to put everything out in the public domain, but right now it feels like there's nothing.
Well, look, I think the politics in this environment are pretty clear. Voters are hungry for politicians to be angry, to throw up their elbows, to take a tougher stance with the negotiations with the United States. And I think when you're unfettered from the actual reality of those negotiations, like Mr. Poilievre or like Mr. Ford or like Premier Eby, it's easy to do that. It's easy to be the tough, angry guy throwing around a lot of big words and a lot of tough talk. But if you're in the actual negotiation, if you have a seat at that table, the Prime Minister is a lot more fettered by what he can do to try and respond to the political environment and what voters are expecting from him. And I think the reality is that the Prime Minister wasn't just elected to have his elbows up, as I think Mr. Poilievre said, and a lot of others have thrown around. He was elected because he is competent. He's the adult in the room. That a lot of Canadians put their confidence in him as the person who was up to this challenge and up to this moment. And I think he's responding to this particular moment right now in the right way. He's responding to it with maturity. He's responding to it with a sense of purpose, a sense of an eye on the ball. We've got to get the job done, and we're ready to do it. The President of the United States is throwing a temper tantrum over a television ad, and I think it would be unwise of Mr. Carney to try and respond accordingly, even if it would delight voters.
Okay, I got to take a quick commercial break. Round two with the front bench. After that break, we're exactly 1 week away from the federal budget. We'll assess how things are going next. Stay right there.
Canadians are hungry for an affordable budget. In the name of 2.2 million people lined up at food banks, will we finally get an affordable budget for affordable food and affordable living?
It's clear that the member opposite is driving for a Christmas election, and I really hope that's not true, because Canadians are counting on us to pass this budget.
If they want their budget passed, they have to make it an affordable budget so that there's affordable food and affordable quality of life for the Canadian people.
The Canada Disability Benefit, the Canadian Dental Care Plan, the National School Food Program. When it comes time to step up, what did the Conservatives opposite do? They voted against these supports.
Economic management is a big part of Prime Minister Mark Carney's political brand coming into politics after leading central banks in Canada and the UK. Now the banker's budget is just exactly a week away, and a stream of pre-budget announcements have come out from more RCMP and border agents to supports for workers through the Trump trade war. What messages, if any, are breaking through to Canadians? Let's bring back the front bench. Dan Moulton, Shakir Chambers, Kathleen Monk, and Laura Stone. We've kind of been following the trajectory of the pre-budget strategy for a while now, Shakir. And I wonder, when you think about the announcements that they made, like clearly they made a decision to put some of the budget out in the window before the actual budget day. If you think of what they've announced so far, what message do you think they're hoping to deliver, and do you think they have?
I think the message they're hoping to deliver is obviously a strong economy in the face of Trump's tariffs, and hopefully, support for jobs. But I think ultimately, what's breaking through is sacrifices needing to be made by Canadians in these tough times. Austerity that's going to probably occur through, whether it's balancing the operational budget or, so laying off some bureaucrats. And I'm just not sure that's the right message to kind of put forth. I think Mark Carney needs to find a way to spin a more positive narrative about, economic growth, positive job creation, and especially youth unemployment, which is at super high levels. You know what the Conservatives are going to do. You know their attack line already. I mean, the fact that Pierre would put down a marker of $42 billion deficit, which is obviously impossible for the Liberals to achieve right now. You know where he's going on his attacks. You know he's going to talk about cost of living, lowering taxes, getting rid of the industrial carbon tax. So what is your kind of counterpunch to someone like Pierre, who's going to be very good in terms of getting in front of media, being on social media, and talking about how this government spending is kind of making your life more unaffordable? But I'm not seeing that right now. And I think for just the average Joe who's listening to this stuff and watching what's going on, I really do think that the sacrifices piece and the austerity measures is really what's breaking through to a lot of people, and it's just not a good message that you want to be delivering in your first budget.
What do you think about that, Dan? Do you think that is the case, or do you think these sort of successive pre-budget announcements have allowed for a different narrative?
Well, I would say, Vash, I worked for a finance minister for a number of years in the province of Ontario, and we put a lot of effort in advance of the budget into finding all the nuggets and the bits and pieces, and probably find about 30 of them to roll out the 30 days before the budget and a series of pre-budget announcements. That's become the norm in this country, both provincially and federally. I don't think that's what Minister Champagne, his team, or the team around the Prime Minister are doing right now. In fact, I think what we have seen in pre-budget quote-unquote announcements has been relatively limited to the quantum of content we're going to see outlined in the budget next week. The reality is, when this budget is introduced, the conversation is almost immediately going to turn in a minority parliament to whether or not it will pass and whether or not we will have another election. And so I think the imperative for them is going to be to bring forward a budget that demonstrates the Prime Minister has a serious plan to deal with a whole range of challenges our country is facing, and bring forward a plan to have solutions and outcomes that actually respond to those challenges. I think they have to look like they have a serious, actionable plan to deal with this moment and to show Canadians that they are the most reliable party to elect to office should we head towards an election. Because the reality is, we're just going to be talking about politics for the weeks after it gets introduced. We're not going to talk about content.
That's a very good point. Around like getting enough votes to actually pass this thing, Kathleen. Where are they going to find the votes?
Yeah, I would actually say that they've given up on the idea of the narrative, and they're just focused on the process stories actually right now. Because normally, as Dan just said, it is a case where a finance minister wants to roll out little trinkets and baubles and start putting little, balloon stories out there to test the waters to see if something will land with the public. We've not seen anything land with the public except actually the process stories about whether this, almost like we talked about last week on the show, the budget chicken stare-off. Is it going to pass? Is it not going to pass? We heard a week ago the House leader, Steve McKinnon, say, not sure if I have the votes. This week, he's saying, I don't have the votes. And that's all you're hearing repeated. And so maybe actually the Liberals are embracing politics and the process stories for once, because that's what it seems like is coming across. Because we're not really seeing, despite the extraordinary measure last week, and we didn't talk about this on the show, but it was an extraordinary measure that he actually asked for prime time TV time, the Prime Minister that is, to speak to all Canadians about the budget, and yet delivered no news. I was just thinking about that coming into studio, and I was like, when did we last actually have a Prime Minister in advance of a budget demand prime time television. The time, what comes to my memory, at least, is 2009, when Harper, 2008-9, during the financial crisis, where he had to revamp after his fiscal statement, economic statement, he demanded primetime airtime to speak to Canadians because of the coalition crisis, because the opposition parties at the time were thinking, I mean, it's pretty rare for that to happen, and yet Carney demanded that time and yet really had nothing to say. So I feel like they're just embracing the process stories now, and it's all going to be about whether the budget passes or not. And I think ultimately...
You're just driving in thinking, why was I here? Why am I coming back? I was already here so late last week.
Exactly.
Laura, what do you think about that aspect of it? The politics of all of this, the fact that we will be focusing on whether it can pass, and where will we be focusing? Like, which party?
Well, look, I mean, I think we just had the Donald Trump election. I think this is still the Donald Trump budget, right? I mean, this is kind of framed as the document or the budget that is going to counter kind of the uncertain times that we're in. And I think, I'm sure the Canadian government would like to head into the budget week having secured some sort of agreement with the United States. But the fact that we haven't, I think, kind of underscores further the Liberals' message and what they're kind of trying to get across. I think, and what we've heard from the Liberals kind of testing the opposition party, saying you're really going to bring us down now, and sort of this uncertainty, this turbulent times, the economic consequences of that. I think where we've all been looking, with both the Bloc and the Conservatives coming out pretty hard with specific demands of what they want to see from the Liberals. I think all eyes are on Kathleen's NDP. What's that party going to do? Are they going to strike some sort of agreement heading in? Are they going to keep their cards close to their chest? Are some of them not going to show up? What kind of progressive measures might be in the document that that they can live with? Because really, in reality, I don't think any of these opposition parties want an election right now. But the other two opposition parties, the Bloc and the Conservatives, have already kind of shown their cards. And so we'll see what the Liberals and the NDP are able to discuss heading into budget week.
Look forward to our Christmas election, everyone. Thanks so much. Just joking. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate the time and the discussion tonight. Our front bench, Dan Moulton, Shakir Chambers, Kathleen Monk, and Laura Stone. We'll take a quick break here on Power Play. Lots more to come in just a few minutes. Stay right there. Welcome back to Power Play. Our top story is, of course, our takeaway tonight, the impasse between Canada and the United States in negotiations. U.S. President Donald Trump bringing a halt to those negotiations late last week. He says because of Ontario's anti-tariff ad featuring Ronald Reagan. We spoke to former Quebec Premier Jean Charest, who is also a member of the council advising the Prime Minister on this issue. He's in Washington, D.C., appearing at a Chamber of Commerce event. He had this to say about that ad.
I was not offended by the ad that Premier Ford put out there, and no one could anticipate that President Trump reacted the way he did. And I even put it on my own social media for the whole 7-minute of the Ronald Reagan intervention, so people can make up their own mind. But we're also adults. If it's a distraction to the American administration, well, so be it.
There is no communication from either the Americans or the federal government here about when negotiations might or could resume. We do know, however, the Prime Minister remains in Asia on a tour of sorts that will culminate in APEC at the end of this week. That conference, on the sidelines of that conference, I should say, he is scheduled to meet with President Xi Jinping of China, the first such meeting that's taken place in about 8 years, or since 2018, I should say, 6 years in this country. It should be something to watch. I'm going to leave Power Play there. I'm Vashi Kapelas. Thank you so much for watching tonight, and we'll see you tomorrow.